tell everybody that's watching this that I actually have two podcasts. One has been on pause for a while, but I'm gonna start it over with this discussion with Frederick here. We met on LinkedIn, and I was particularly tuned into a post that you did that I have up on my screen here, but I'm trying to find. I think it was about 2 weeks ago. And it had to do with masculinity myth busting on Mondays. So it was actually 1 week ago. And that really grabbed my attention. And I thought that could be a great jumping off point for a short discussion between two fellows today. And the podcast that I'm going to host this on is called the Humpty Project. So I'll I haven't even given you really any insight as to what that is, Frederick, but basically it's to challenge the fragility of many long-held biases that some of us hold, particularly people that have been in the global majority, male, white. Sometimes we are unaware and don't see our blind spots and unaware of the biases we have. And sometimes the way we react to things suggests a lot of fragility. So that's how I kind of came up with the idea of it. It is a fairly provocative title, but so welcome and tell everybody a little bit about yourself.
I love it. Robert, thank you, for having me on. Thanks for, sharing this space with me. And, you know, I will say this, before I tell people, kind of my background. I, I don't know everything, and I have my own biases.
Yep.
My lived experience is white heterosexual male, and lived in mostly suburban, areas my entire life. That doesn't mean I don't know some things, but I guess the point, I think, and maybe this is kind of like the overarching theme of your show, is that so I think it's important to recognize your own weaknesses and your own insecurities.
Yep.
And that is something that I was not always able to do openly. So just to say that as an intro, that, if you're listening, think about, your own insecurities, your own biases, and how you can challenge and get more comfortable, admitting that to yourself, and then maybe admitting it out loud, and having important conversations and listening to important conversations like this. My background is, I spent a better part of a decade in the construction industry. I was a project manager at a mid-sized commercial construction company here in Syracuse, New York. Was around a lot of men because that industry is definitely dominated by more male people than female, and saw, firsthand how much men, struggle just communicating openly, talking about things in a
Right.
more heart to heart, getting in touch with their heart center sort of way. And at the tail end of my career as a construction professional, or actually just after it ended, so January 2021, right after COVID, I was laid off. It was the first time in my life I've ever been fired from a job. So it was definitely something that felt very confronting to me, and I
No
had
doubt.
time to really think, kind of what is my next step. And I've always been talking since I was a kid, since I was a young boy. When you get approached in high school to say, hey, what do you want to do with your life? My answer was always, I want to help people. But I never was able to isolate and articulate and identify, how I would best serve that role.
Right.
Now, in construction, as a project manager, I was able to train, new employees and teach, and I really loved that. I'd be a mentor to some of the new hires each year. There was a summer internship program that I was a part of there. I really loved training and coaching. And so as I was going through this process of figuring that out, and taking some time to be dad at home as well, I have two kids. I started seeing some things around the house that I hadn't seen. And,
Right.
because I was too busy in my own echo chamber, my own world, to notice, to be honest. And that doesn't, I don't mean to make excuses for that. I should have noticed. But I didn't. And so being home more, I started to say, oh, Sarah, my wife, Sarah's been taking care of this. Sarah's been taking care of that. Sarah's been doing this. And Sarah, by the way, my wife is a champion. She is a someone who I recommend, if you know her, you love her. And she's a midwife. She serves the community in so many different ways. She is an inspiration to me. And I would say that her her patience is unmatched. And
Okay.
so we ended up talking about fair play. I don't know how familiar you are, Robert, with fair play,
Not
but
by, I think in context, I might know where you're going, but please elaborate.
so Eve Rodsky wrote a book called Fair Play. There was a documentary released by the
Okay.
same name. And what fair play is basically, in a nutshell, it's a system to help couples identify and bring to light the invisible work that happens at home,
Mm,
the mental and cognitive labor that typically falls to women in
right.
heteronormative relationships. And so that was I actually watched the documentary first, then I read the book, and it was right then and there that I decided I was going to become a fair play method facilitator. So that's what I
Okay.
do today is I coach men on relationships and communication. But I really, my heart is really in the fair play world where I really want to help men see the things that they're not seeing right now. And my premise, and I believe it's Eve Rodsky's premise as well, is that by shedding light on these things that are invisible to us, to most people, will allow for more connected and more sustainable relationships.
Right.
And so that's what I'm passionate about. I want people to love their life. I want them to realize they can design and create it. I want them to have fun in their relationships again. Uh, can I say make relationships great again? I don't know. But it's like I think we get stuck in our ruts of life and we just keep going in these routines and it gets just monotonous, if you will, for a lot of us. And we don't stop to say, hey, like, what am I missing here? Like, what can I do better? How can I become better? What am I not seeing? What am I not understanding? And I think it takes outside counsel, whether that's therapy, coaching, listening to a podcast, reading books, to really, and then reflecting, right? To say, like, okay, this is what I'm missing. It's that whole you can't read the label from inside the bottle sort of thing.
Right.
Um, my dad passed away at the end of 2021.
A lot
So
of
at the beginning,
changes then.
so January 2021, I lost my job. December 2021, my dad passed. So those two things in that year, and I say this with all the truth in the world, that was the best year of my life because, and I miss my dad. Don't get me wrong, and losing your job is not a fun experience, especially when you're not expecting to. But that job was holding me back from a life of purpose that I wasn't living. And that was my own fault, my own doing. I kept saying to myself, Sarah's going to get her master's. I'll wait till she's done with her master's. Sarah's, uh, busy with this XYZ. It's not the right time. It's not the right time. I'll just keep pushing it off, pushing it off. Well, meanwhile, I was miserable overall. I mean, there were glimmers of light there, but it wasn't fulfilling me in a way that I was really helping people in the way that I wanted to. And so I would come home and I would unleash my stress and my anxiety on my family. I would not be present in the rooms, truly
Sure.
present with them. And so I started to really I was missing that. And it finally came to a point where, the decision was made for me. And in reflecting, and talking to Sarah, of course, it was like, you know what, that was the best thing that could have ever happened. Now, my dad passing obviously is not a good thing, but with him passing, it also gave me another point of reflection because now my dad struggled. He suffered in silence. He struggled with depression, with alcohol addiction. He was a wonderful man, a beautiful soul, but he just had some inner turmoil, and he was of the generation of men. And this is why I talk about masculinity myths and myth busting, and why I'm so passionate about this. I watched him suffer, and I watched him not be able to speak about it and not go get help. And so one of the things men are often told when they're kids, and I was told the same thing, and I'm sure, Robert, I'd love to hear your side of this as well, but you know, to be tough, to be strong, to
Right.
be to take care of things by yourself, not you know, to ask for help is considered a weakness. And I'm here to say, as to as many people that will listen to me, and this goes for any gender, it's not just men, that if you need help, ask for help. It's if you are uncomfortable talking to someone about your problems, that is totally human. We are
Right.
all uncomfortable talking about our weaknesses. But I'm here to say I was an insecure man, and I still struggle with some insecurities. I'm not perfect, but I would have never said out loud I'm insecure. As a matter of fact, my wife challenged me early on in our marriage, told me you're insecure. And you know what my reaction was? You could probably predict it.
Yeah.
Defensiveness. No,
Absolutely.
I'm not. You're wrong. Well, all that did was build a wall instead of a bridge. So that's ultimately,
Okay.
that's the work that I do, and that's why I do the work I do.
So, so many, I've got a few notes, so many thoughts that I have, and economy of words is not my speciality. So I'll try to just share a little bit of insight. Uh, I'm going to say I'm a bit older than you by maybe a generation. So do you mind sharing your age?
I'm 45.
Okay. So I'm 62. So technically I could be your father. If I had a child young. Been married 3 times, twice to the same woman, married at 19. When you talked about insecurity, that resonated quickly because I was the first one in my family that was going to go to college. Came from a uh, almost Appalachia and Eastern Pennsylvania background, not a very wealthy family, definitely lower middle class. So no one went to college. I was going to be the one. I was the superstar, the genius from the family. A lot of pressure there, but at the same time, um, no real desire and no mentors. So I went right to work, knew what I wanted to do, went right to work at 17, right after high school ended, and had been in the electronics industry since. Bought a home when I was 18, ran for public office at 20. Very driven to make it and very driven to show that I didn't go to college, but look, I made it. I have this car. I have a new house that I had built. I've got stuff. I've got this furniture in it. Back in the 80s, Peter Gabriel did a video and song Big Time. I'm on my way. I'm making it. And I love to reference music lyrics. So that would kind of personify me. It's like, I made it, big time, puffing out the chest. I'm the man. I provide. I've done it. But there was a tremendous amount of insecurity driving me. That kept me motivated. It kept me productive. It meant I worked longer, harder, more hours. Proud of the fact that on later in life I would travel back and forth to Asia. I remember somebody saying to me, "You worked the entire flight, 16 hours. You worked the entire flight." I'm like, "Yeah, proud of that." Very little work-life balance. Understand when my ex and I divorced. Uh, if it wasn't work, then it was running. I was a marathoner, a runner. I was pretty good. So I trained and I kept training to be better. So a lot of insecurity was driving that. When I got divorced the second time from the same woman, I really, at 48, took the time to look within myself. And that was the first time I ever admitted that I needed therapy. I did it more for family therapy, but I did it because ultimately because I was gaining something from it. I chose to push myself out of my comfort zone. Some of what would give me viewpoints that would slowly get me to this point, Frederick, is that my wife and I, at that time, my ex now, we adopted 2 mixed race kids as infants. And I started to see the world through their eyes, which is different. Both my ex and I are, white, Caucasian, no doubt, not mixed race, not the biological parents of my kids. I started to see things differently through their eyes, but I still was very stuck in the trappings of what a capitalist society would tell a man to be as the breadwinner, suck it up, uh, do it all yourself, take on all the burdens of the world. And, if you would call me insecure, it'd be like, no, I'm the most confident, strongest person there is. You can't break me kind of attitude. But I kind of learned much later in life, in my late 40s and then 50s, to start pushing myself outside my comfort zone and adopting that comfort in discomfort attitude that I knew as an athlete worked, right? I knew that if I got uncomfortable running longer, doing another hill, pushing myself, I knew inherently that that made me stronger, but I didn't apply that always to um, those unconscious biases and those things that came with, kind of came with the programming of being a 62-year-old man raised in the, 60s and 70s as a child. So I started, I really started in earnest in 2018 when I attended a Women in Electronics session in our industry. And a man, successful man running a business, was on a panel and he was asked what do men need to do. And he said, we need to do better. And I said, well, what does better look like? So I started embarking in 2018 on what better looks like. Now, I don't do any of this for a living. This is like an artist to me paints, right? They do things for their own joy. So I podcast, I post things on LinkedIn, I challenge myself really uh, for my own benefit. And I've told people that maybe one day when I do retire, maybe one day I could find a way to make a little money and share this, as a speaker. Who knows? But I'm not organized around doing that. My day job is still what drives me, but I have a lot more balance in my life. I'm willing to ask for help. And my wife and I do follow, I've been remarried now for 13 years. We do follow, kind of an equitable household. She tends to do the cooking, but I do all the cleanup. We're both thankful for what the other does. We don't expect it. We don't apply stereotypes. She's happy to let me do the driving. Sometimes I wish, I get jealous when I see her asleep when I'm on a long drive, but we have good communication that way. I didn't have that in my previous relationship. Part of it was on me. And some of the other things. So we said ruts. Wow, was I ever in a rut? I was in a rut. My ex and I were good parents, but not a great couple. It was just kind of a benign relationship. So rut really hit. Um, one of the things that came to mind though is I've been talking to a younger gentleman lately, and he's torn by what he sees as DEI practitioners like you and me, white men that benefited from an environment where DEI didn't exist when we started to come up. Now, it might have with you, but certainly with me in 1980, 82, when I was entering the workforce, people were not talking about diversity, equity initiatives. Um, he sees a hypocrisy. And I think there's some younger white men who see DEI as a weapon that's being used against them, and they don't see any support. But what I see in what you're doing is you're trying to support men, masculinity in general without the toxic term toxic. Masculine traits should really be for everybody, is the way I kind of see it. Those things that we hold up to be the best of a masculine trait work for everybody. So that's kind of why I thought you and I could have an interesting conversation, and we're limited because of my unpaid Zoom that we're on, which is good because I'll talk too long. But I think there's lots and lots we could talk about based on what I've heard already. So with that, how would you address those people, men, white men, younger white men that feel like DEI is now being used as a weapon against them and they can't get a break and there's no support system for them? Is that something that you run into or have to tackle in your daily work?
That's a great question, Robert. I've seen that type of response, a reaction on some of the posts. I'm fairly active on LinkedIn, so I have seen some of that. I don't have the answer.
Sure.
That is a loaded question, and I'd be lying if I told you I can wave this magic wand and make that feeling go away. It's a fair feeling to have. I'm not living that experience as a 45-year-old white man.
Right.
And I'm also running my own business now, which I've never done before. So this, I'm sort of isolated in a way because I'm figuring these things out on my own. I don't have a team, you know, other than I have a business coach, but I don't have my own staff, my own employees. I'm not working for someone, so I'm not
Sure.
coming up looking for jobs. But if that's what they're experiencing right now, I always have this. I have the saying, questions are keys. And what I mean by that is, if I don't know about something, I like to ask more questions. And I think that sounds so obvious, but it's not always, the simple is not necessarily easy. And we often like to jump to conclusions as humans. I mean, we all have been guilty of that at times. It's why I advocate for like daily intentional practices,
Right.
because it's very easy to get back stuck into our ego and letting our ego drive our decision making and our thought processes. And so when I come up against that, and I'm sorry if I'm not answering your question, but when I come up against those types of beliefs by people, I want to ask more questions. Tell me
Sure.
about this, and this is what I do with men in my coaching and relationships, because I think we get this idea that we need to be right. And I talk about this a lot, Robert. I don't know how long you've been following me for, but I hate binary thinking. I think in general, it's useless. Certainly there's some specific situations where binary thinking can be a benefit. Like if someone's attacking you, you need to either decide to,
Right.
fight or run, right?
Right.
But when we talk about it's why, again, when I talk about masculinity, femininity, it's like, and a great point you made, masculinity traits are for everybody. So are feminine traits for men.
Exactly. I like to say
This,
empathy is not a four-letter word, but for a lot of
yes.
men, it is. It
And
immediately
so,
raises like no. The
mm,
biggest insults to a man is to be called feminine traits many times. You can go down, you can go down various paths and be more vulgar than I'd like to be, although I'm pretty good at it. Like sissy as a simple one. I mean, these are insults. Or, if you're insinuated to be gay, that's immediately an insult. So anything feminine generally, I found that men who haven't done much work on this immediately get the hairs on the back of their neck up. And I did, you know,
mm,
I speak from experience.
yeah. Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think as a man, I've been there too. I mean, again 45 years old, so I didn't think the way I think. The way I think today was not the way I thought when I was 20.
Right.
Now, I felt some uncomfortable, some discomfort around certain behaviors that I saw some of my male friends, participating in, that I didn't, I was not raised certain ways. So I can be more specific. Um, like mistreatment of women, this idea of going out and picking up chicks type of
Right.
thing, talking about women in disparaging ways. And at the time, I would have probably said girls, because I'm talking about when I was younger.
Right. Right.
I never felt comfortable in those situations. However, I also was not comfortable enough to speak up against it. And so while some of my, discomfort was maybe just I guess almost within me, I didn't express it outwardly as much as I should have or could have.
Yeah.
And
If you allow me, I'll dovetail off that and say that's another big part of my mission, is that I kind of realized a few years ago that at nearing 60 at that time, who who can use their voice in my industry most safely. And it's somebody with 30 plus experience. It's a white male. I mean, why am I afraid to use my voice? But I still have that. I don't have the college degree. I'll lose my job. I'm old. I'll get fired. I'll be a Walmart greeter attitude. And I know that some of what I do rubs some people the wrong way. And I tend to go more towards the confrontational way of putting things out there. So calling in versus calling out is something I'm learning about. Listening to respond is a big problem. So, you talked about actively listening and asking more questions. And I'll circle back to what I originally said. I wasn't looking really necessarily for an answer to these younger people who see DEI as an existential threat to their existence or reverse discrimination. But what I see with this gentleman, what I decided to do, and he and I talked yesterday, we've now had three connections by just chatting on Teams or Zoom or whichever. I've kind of saw somebody who needs not a shoulder to cry on, but he needed somebody to hear him that he thought was not just in it for a buck or trying to build a client base. And I understand his trauma. I cannot tell him that it was the same for me. When I grew up, I didn't grow up with DEI initiatives, but he was told literally he was going to be promoted. And then the weekend passed, and after that on Monday, he was told, "We're sorry, your boss misspoke. You're actually going to be laid off, you and some others, because we have too many men that are moving up through the organization. We need to move more women and people of various ethnicities through the organization." And that was really hard on him, and that's his lived experience. My challenge to him is that what you're always going to focus on? Because I guarantee you there's probably 10 or 20 more instances where you or other people like you have gotten an advantage and you didn't even know it. It's just the way it is. We all hire people we know. We refer the people that we grew up with or went to school with. And it tends to be a very insular, if you're a white male, it tends to be a very insular white, we all know each other. We went to school with each other. We all lived in the same communities, and it tends to just propagate and you don't even know it. You're in it, the forest through the trees type of thing. So I'm
Mm.
not trying to change him because it took me my own and years and insight to change, but I'm trying to offer him at least somebody that's willing to listen. And he's given me a new perspective, and that is that I can't tell the younger people just do what I did. This is the experience I had, so therefore the experience you have will be the same. It's a different world from 1982 to 2024. So
Well, once again, questions are keys for him, right? So it's like, asking himself some really hard questions and being extremely honest when he answers them. I mean, I think it's important when we ask questions to
right,
ourselves to answer them with extreme honesty. And I say extreme honesty because if you're not careful, you can lie to yourself. So,
right,
having him ask himself some reflection questions is really key, but he can also, it's this idea of like control what you can control. Obviously that's if that situation happened exactly the way he's describing, that is a wrong. However, get outside yourself, right? It's like, and it's hard to do. I'm not saying this is not
right.
something that it's like I'm great at or anyone necessarily is great at, but it's necessary. If you cannot control the situation, you have two choices. You can complain about it and do nothing about it, or you can start to focus on the things that you can control. And so, and like to your point, to your advice for him is like, what are you going to do? Focus on that, or are you going to move forward?
Right.
Progress is not linear, and there's revenge is not time well spent. You have to get out of your own way sometimes, and
Yeah,
if
that's
you're holding on to that pain, that's again why therapy or coaching is so important for people. It's like, yeah, we all go through some things that we don't know how to process
right.
ourselves. So we need some outside perspective. It's great that he's talking to you. That you're almost like coaching him in a way, I'm sure. And I hope he appreciates that you're spending your time that way. But
Yep.
yeah, it's like questions are keys for him. So self-reflection questions, and then ask, what about other people? What are they going through?
Right.
Is what you went through, and I don't necessarily mean for comparison's sake, but I do like to think about like what's happening in Israel and Palestine right now. That, when we talk about real trauma,
Yeah.
like that's nothing compared to what he went through. And so
Yeah.
again, not taken away from the trauma and the pain and the personal, feelings in that sense, but when I'm really struggling with things of that nature in my own life, that's what I do. I start to ask myself some hard questions. I focus on what I can control, and then I think about other people who are going through way worse things than I'm going through. And it
Yeah.
tends to center me back to, okay, I'm okay. I'm going to be okay. I can figure this out. If I can't do it on my own, I can ask somebody who like yourself or like someone else that knows a little bit more than I know.
Yeah. For me, many times I go back to that thought, like you were describing with the horrific uh, genocide we see throughout, Israel, Palestine, and other countries, other parts of the world. Um, we are describing first world problems. I'm sitting in a single family home in California with a swimming pool outside, air conditioning, running water, you know, heat in the winter when I need it. It's sometimes good to kind of recenter yourself with that understanding. I think you kind of just lit a light bulb in my mind where this gentleman is, and I think he's 29, so he's much younger than me. Again, he could be your son. Um, he's he's falling into the trap of letting that one situation define him and eat at him and define his existence. And that's where I was when my ex and I divorced. So twice she called for the divorce, twice she was having an affair. Was I ignoring the relationship? Was it kind of benignly just it wasn't a malignant relationship, but it was a benign relationship. So for sure I was. For sure I understand why she seeked things outside the relationship. But she did it twice, without talking, without trying to save the family. I had two kids that were teenagers then. So that was hurtful. And I realized that that could define me because not only did the failure of marriage twice and the breakup of my family really hurt. She got a good divorce lawyer that this time there was money to be grabbed onto, and I was hit with a lifetime alimony settlement that's going to make it really hard for me to ever retire. I have to pay her money through life, for life, unless she remarries. I knew that that could make me really, really bitter, really, really hate women, and just kind of hang on that. And that's that. While I can't say my situation is the same as his, you just kind of lit a light bulb for my next discussion with him is I can at least share that I think I know a little bit and empathize where you're coming from because, man, I was pissed off at the world right then and there. I got hit with, my house is gone. I moved into an apartment. This is a kid who bought a house at 18 and now he's got to move into an apartment. I was paying alimony, 2 child supports, trying to get my kid into college. I got all my furniture in the apartment from Free Cycle and, used. These were all things that defined me. All those material things defined me. And here I was having to come to grips with that. And I didn't want that to define me because I knew that it could be something that ate at me and, rippled through other parts of my persona and my work environment. And so when I seeked out marital counseling, it was, secondarily, I realized the benefit for me just admitting that I would benefit from it personally without the ex being there because she never attended. I also, just to be candid, I was raised Christian Lutheran and moved on to Buddhist mindfulness type practices. And Buddhism, I wouldn't say I'm a Buddhist, but I follow those practices. So I know that we're going to be bumping up against, I don't have a timer here, but we're bumping up to I do have a timer, thankfully. It says 4 minutes and a half. So I would like you to be able to tell people how they can reach out to you, but I'd like you to feel like you can wrap this up for everybody.
Yeah, so find me at Seat at the Table Coaching and seatatthetablecoaching.com. That is my website. You can find me on LinkedIn, just Frederick Van Riper. I'm sure you could search it. I'm on
Yeah, and
Instagram at Frederick Van Riper.
I'll grab the contact information, Frederick, and I'll post it in the comments. This will get edited and put up on LinkedIn. And
Yeah, and just for everybody's knowledge, I help anyone who thinks I'm the best person for them to help them. So yeah, my goal in saying that is this: if you need help, get help. You don't have to get help from me.
Right.
Certainly, I'm happy to help. Reach out, ask questions, hop on a call with me. We'll talk it out. And if you think I'm the best person for you, that's amazing. I'm not the best person for everybody, and that's should be obvious. But again, I think it's important. Like that's kind of the vibe that I'm throwing out there is I'm not a salesperson. I'm a coach. I just want to help you. I want to help you get better. I want to listen. I want to ask questions. And if you think that's the vibe you're going for, like certainly let's hop on a call and talk it out and see if it makes sense. I do want to just touch on couple quick things. I know we're
Sure.
running up on time, but you mentioned the word programming earlier in the episode,
Right.
and I really love that term. This idea of like being, it's when we don't realize that the programming is happening, but when we're raised by two people, or if you're lucky enough to have two parents, um, you know, regardless, you're being programmed in a certain way. They're raising you in a certain way, and you're also being socialized by society. That's why we call it the socialization, right? It's like you're paying, there's certain messages that you're receiving at school, certain messages you're receiving from your friends, and
Exactly.
so all of those things program you, and they program some beliefs that are within you. And so if you haven't stopped to think about, hey, what do I believe and what's driving my decisions and my choices, it's probably time to do that. And I think I lived a long time. It sounds silly, but as a coach, especially now, but I think I lived a long time where I wasn't stopping and reflecting. I wasn't taking time daily to think. I wasn't setting intentions each day. I wasn't talking about daily affirmations, which you may or may not believe in, but I believe in the power of an affirmation, especially if you struggle with insecurity. So
Right.
it's really helpful. So I love that you mentioned that word, and I think people should pay attention to their socializations. And when we talk about masculinity, femininity, and I apologize for the speed that I'm talking at right now, but I know we're
We
short
have
on
about a
time.
minute and 40 to go.
We're talking again about this binary thinking of, I either have to be masculine or feminine, or I either have to be, you know, good or bad, or I
Right.
have to be, this or that. And it's divisive. It
It
is.
is.
It's divisive. So I would like to challenge people. This is what I'd like to leave the episode with. There was a post yesterday talking about, well, let's stop talking about toxic masculinity, and let's call
Exactly.
it mature masculinity and immature masculinity. And I don't like that either, because it's still divisive. It's still binary thinking. And so what I would like to offer for people to consider for themselves is to use these terms: restrictive masculinity and expansive masculinity. And what I mean by that is simply this: you can be anything you want to be.
Right.
Just be who you are. And I think when we talk about like imposter syndrome and those types of things, we are afraid to be rejected by people for
Well,
being who we truly are.
I think that's a great takeaway. I remember that post, and I'm working to try to find language that is going to include more people rather than immediately turn them off. And what I'd recommend in closing is do what I'm doing. Follow other people on LinkedIn and gain new insights. That's how I found you. And I appreciate you taking the time. I think we're going to wrap up here.
Thanks.